So during this first session, this afternoon, we've heard about pilot projects, recommendations, better stories of responding to the impacts and the policies associated with it. As you heard in Alain Denis' presentation, these were developed with a participatory, innovative, multidisciplinary approach in what in RESISTIRÉ we have called open studios. And as this methodology can be applied to many other projects and initiatives, we would like to give you the opportunity to find out more about this and to hear from participants' experience. So I'd like now to call Lotte Callerstig, who is researcher in political science and gender studies at the Center for Feminist Social Studies at Örebro University, who will be leading this panel and leading you into open studio methodology. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's been kind of a cliffhanger, this with the open studio. So we're finally going to find out a little bit what it is about. And I know that you're probably quite tired now. It's been a long afternoon. It's very hot and the energy might be a little bit low. And energy is actually something we thought about a lot doing the open studios. So we're going to see a film, and then we're going to have a discussion with some of the participants, and also the team who has been working with this, even though there are many here who has been working also in the open studio. So let's have a discussion about that. So I have been working a lot with action research, feminist interactive research during my time as a researcher. I'm very happy to be able to be part of the RESISTIRÉ project, because I do think that one of the really important outputs of the project is actually this methodology that we developed and tested, which very much sort of is grounded in democratic knowledge building and also collective intelligence and collective action, bringing together diverse type of stakeholders. So we're going to see a film first. So, no.
Open studios are the co-creation step in the RESISTIRÉ process, where results from each research cycle come together. During an open studio, results from research, analysis, and insights are further explored by participants to be transformed into ideas for feasible social innovations with potential for meaningful impact. The open studios are an innovative, multidisciplinary approach to policy design, bringing together a wide diversity of participants and methods to ensure creative and innovative outputs. The RESISTIRÉ project is designed to be participatory. During these intensive two-day open studios, project partners work together with activists, researchers, policymakers, NGO representatives, user experts, and creative profiles like artists to focus on specific thematic areas. Internal participants bring insights from the project activities, while external participants bring their expertise and creativity. During an open studio, participants go through various stages of divergence, or exploring issues and possibilities more widely, and of convergence, or working towards more focused solutions. Throughout the 2 days, ideas are captured using sticky notes on a series of posters, all designed to trigger ideas and discussions. To facilitate meaningful exploration, qualitative research results are translated into informative visual tools that help to inspire the participants. Throughout the 3 cycles, RESISTIRÉ has collected 780 individual narratives from 31 European countries. These narratives were used to create a set of personas for each open studio. Each persona represents a different archetype of people that were affected by the pandemic in one way or another. A persona aims to communicate various inequalities or challenges faced because of policies or experiences related to COVID-19. They serve to stimulate creativity, create empathy, and to take some distance from the personal experiences of the participants. RESISTIRÉ also collected promising practices in 31 European countries which alleviate the impact of COVID-19 policies on inequalities. Borrowing the term from feminist scholar Dina Georgis, these better stories of policies and civil society initiatives aren't a perfect fix, but illustrate how a given societal situation can be meaningfully improved. Better stories are used as inspiration, as stories that identify ways to improve on existing practices without being solutions that are unattainable. As Dina Georgis argues in her book on the topic, there is always a better story than the better story. Participants use the better stories to find even better solutions. While day one gives participants the freedom to brainstorm and explore issues and possibilities, day two is more focused on developing solutions that are concrete, visible, and innovative. It's the responsibility of the facilitators to ease the transition from brainstorm to focused development. In preparation for day two, facilitators reflect on the discussion from day one to identify key topics, recurring themes and issues, and direction for ideas with the most potential. The result of this reflection is presented to participants who are invited to share their thoughts. What is the most important to them? What is missing? What should the Open Studio focus on during the second day? The discussion leads to an organic selection of ideas, and participants are invited to choose which idea or topic they would personally want to work on. The first session of day two serves to create a democratic agenda for the rest of the Open Studio and is a crucial step towards developing concrete outputs. From there, participants break into smaller groups to have a focused brainstorm on their selected topic. In 1 hour, they go from initial idea to concrete output, or a proposal for a better story of their own, innovative solutions to mitigate the negative effects of the pandemic and associated policies. In this way, each Open Studio produces 6 to 8 action ideas that could be either a potential pilot project or the basis for recommendations to various stakeholders. This Open Studio flow is not only approachable and effective for co-creation, but it's structured in a way that can seamlessly adapt to diverse thematic focuses. Using this approach, RESISTIRÉ held 12 Open Studios on 12 very different themes, ranging from issues related to health and care, to evolving masculinity roles, to countering new forms of gender-based violence. The Open Studio approach is also flexible. It is possible to adapt to different spaces and budgets, meaning that it can work just as well online as it does in person. There are pros and cons for each format, but both produce consistent enthusiasm and quality outcomes. After 3 cycles and 12 Open Studios, RESISTIRÉ has produced over 75 innovative ideas for action. Of those ideas, 7 were further developed and launched as pilot projects in 9 very different contexts across 8 European countries. Countless insights have also been integrated into the 22 fact sheets and 16 research agendas produced in all 3 cycles. These serve to support policymakers, advisors, employers, and civil society organizations in understanding the social, economic, political, and environmental effects of COVID-19 policy responses on gender equality, and to suggest practical recommendations to mitigate these effects. These recommendations can also serve to safeguard against the societal impacts of future crises. Inspired? Great. Overwhelmed? No problem. All of this is to say, open studios create a unique opportunity to gather various stakeholders to focus on a shared objective. This diverse participation helps us to better understand inequalities, and the open studio approach provides a format in which we can rapidly share ideas, develop meaningful solutions, and create lasting impact.
Thank you. And we do hope that you're not overwhelmed. And there is the film is also up on the webpage, so you can listen to it again with a bit high sound also. So please welcome up our panelists. And I will present them shortly. We have first Nazli Turker. She is a queer feminist activist based in Istanbul. She works for Gender and Women's Studies Center for Excellence at Sabanci Gender. Alongside Yellow Window, Sabanci was responsible for co-organizing open studios where Nazli primarily contributed to the preparation and recruitment phases and took on the responsibility of facilitating small groups. And I think that could be said for the whole panel here. And you participated yourself in 8 open studios, so you have quite a lot of experience. And then we have Aart Kerremans. Aart works for Yellow Window, a design consultancy headquartered in Antwerp that was in charge of organizing RESISTIRÉ's open studios. In each of the project's 3 cycles, he was involved in the preparation, recruitment, and reporting, and was also responsible for facilitating small groups. And you've been in 7 open studios. And then we have Alicia Bobek. She's a sociologist and works as a researcher in the AIB Research Center on Inclusive and Equitable Cultures, RINS, at Technological University Dublin. Her research is focused on social inequalities with a particular interest on the topics of employment, work, and care. And you were in 8 open studios. And then we have Lina Sandström, a colleague of mine. She is a postdoctoral researcher in gender studies with a PhD in sociology. She is part of the Örebro University team responsible for the qualitative research activities within the RESISTIRÉ project. These research activities help determine the direction of each open studio, as well as providing more concrete inspiration for the personas used in the open studios. Lina was involved in constructing these personas, drawing on the narrative interviews conducted within the project. And I think you participated in 7 open studios, you said. Yeah, so quite an experienced team we have here. Panel we have here. Okay, so let's jump into the questions then. And I will begin with Alicia. You have in your research focused on inequalities with societal groups that are seldom given a voice in matters that concern them. And you're also specialized in qualitative methods in teaching and research in this respect. So how can we make more research together with and not on vulnerable groups? And do you see the open studio as a methods or elements from it that it can be used to inspire other types of research as well?
Does it work? Yeah, it works. Thanks for the question. So I need to emphasize that I'm quite experienced researcher, and I've worked on a lot of projects that regarded either inequalities or vulnerable groups. And from that perspective, I need to say that we usually, when we involve members of the marginalized communities, we stopped at the research base. So basically, yes, there is involvement. We go out, we interview people, or we do focus groups, and that's our data. Now, when it comes to interpreting this data and analyzing, then we are doing it from sort of academic privileged perspective, and not usually going back to reanalyze it with people who are involved. And I think that the open studios created a really interesting opportunity, and I was really surprised by it because it was my first project like that, where we were having participants who worked on the ground with people, and therefore were able to discuss our findings and our insights with us. And that then the kind of the feedback was used for the recommendations and for identifying gaps in research as well, because our interpretation is just the interpretation of issues affecting people, not necessarily identifying every single one of them. And then I think even more importantly, the pilot projects that come out from the Open Studios, and we in TU Dublin were actually coordinating 2 of them. It's giving back then. So it's not only recommendations that go to policymakers and may or may not be heard, but it's also concrete projects that come out straight from the identifying the issues during the first day and then identifying actions on the second day that can be actually used to improve the lives of people on the ground. So that would be my.
Thank you. It's quite interesting with this both being kind of validation of the research results and producing also
I
need
think
for further development.
The recommendations are here very important, because I think, and I've seen that in other projects, that there could be unintended consequences of very well thought of recommendations. But if we don't feed them back, and if we don't have this sort of, I wouldn't say consultation, but collaboration process, then you're at the danger of maybe missing out on something.
Yeah. Thank you. I guess we will come back to this. Okay, so Aart, talking about being overwhelmed, and so you have been working a lot behind the scene in many of the open studios that we have done. And I know that there is a lot of work that the participants actually never see. So what would you say, is it possible for anyone to do an open studio, or do you need to have specific training or digital tools and so on to do it? I think many people wonders this.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the open studios are they're a relatively accessible format, and they can be picked up by a broad range of actors for a variety of different purposes. That being said, I do think the way we filled them in or we interpreted them, we did use some specific tools that need some specific skills. So for instance, for the online open studios, we used a combination of Zoom, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with, but also Miro, which is this online whiteboards that we use to capture people's input, which you also saw in the movie. And it's one thing to have the skills to use those, but it's also important to convey how to use those tools to all of your participants, because they are working in those environments as well. So that's something to keep in mind for sure. The equivalent of that in physical spaces, so in an in-person open studio, that would be physical posters and sticky notes, which is a lot more intuitive to people. But of course, it does require quick writing skills. So just, be prepared to also have that. And then, I think what's definitely one of the biggest obstacles is that you have to get about between 20 and 25 people together for 2 full days, which is a huge time commitment for everyone involved. And so being able to do that is probably the biggest hurdle, I think, that you will encounter if you organize one of these yourself. And of course, we had the support of the entire consortium for that, which was a huge help. And again, thank you for that.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, I felt that many wanted to participate, maybe also because of the solution parts that you were part of developing concrete solutions. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the 2 days then, because as we heard Madeleine was talking about, we do need time. I mean, that's essential, I think, for doing these things. But at the same time, 2 days is a long time. How do you keep the energy up in those 2 days, especially as Maria was saying, in front of Zoom.
Yes, that's a very valid concern. I think it definitely helps that if you have varied exercise or varied sessions. So if you're doing the same exercise over and over again, you will quickly tune out and not be involved anymore. But given that there was, I think significant variation in those sessions, people kept being engaged more or less. A little caveat there, I did personally see at the end of the first day, people could still start to tune out a little bit because it's a lot of brainstorming exercises, one after the other. And so during the second day, you really start to see energy levels pick up again because they engage with everything that was said differently. They start to actually, think more creatively about, potential actions or interventions they could design and implement in a real context, and that might have a real impact. And I think that's a big motivation for a lot of people. And then I would also say, with thanks to our Turkish colleagues at Sabanci, the Qigong exercises that we did every day, so twice in open studio, before the last session really helped a lot in keeping people's energy levels up. People came into the last session energized again and not just, wanting to go, wanting to log off and go on with the rest of their day.
Yeah, it was actually one of the things that a lot of people mentioned afterwards, that they really liked the Qigong sessions. So yeah, okay. Moving over then to Lina. I know, as being your colleague as well in Sweden, that this is the first project, the participatory project that you have actually been in. And where the Open Studio has been a key tool then, of course, used. But do you think that this has inspired you yourself in any way for your own future research? What did you kind of learn from it? Was it something that surprised you, challenged you?
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's been extremely inspiring, really, and something very different from what I did previously. Like, I'm sure you heard the story before, but like 3 years ago when I was finishing my thesis and I was really stressed out about it, one of my colleagues told me, "Don't worry about it, no one's going to read it anyway." And that's like, I think it's a common complaint that, like, even if it is read, it tends to stay within the scientific community. And I think the Open Studios kind of opened my eyes to the fact that research can matter outside this little bubble that we're in. So for me, that's been really important. And I hope that's something that I can take with me, like, going forward as well. So it's just been very different to, instead of just defining the problems, to be part of coming up with solutions, and to do it with such a diverse group of people as well. It's been really good and challenging.
Yeah.
But
Did you find it was a big difference between the ones that were in person? Because I know we were both in the ones that were in person and the ones that were only digital via Zoom.
yes, it's a big like, part of me really wants to say that online is the perfect solution, because, like, for environmental reasons, obviously it's what we should be doing. Like, it does not make sense to have people traveling all across Europe for these 2-day events. And there's a lot of benefits to it. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people can't and won't travel, like financial reasons, visa reasons, family reasons. Like, I have a small child myself. I don't love being away from her for 3 days. So yeah, there's a lot of positives to the online version. But in terms of a social experience, offline is 100 times better for me. Anyway, it's just I don't know, it gives you energy in a way that, like, spending 9 hours on Zoom doesn't. Like, after I think you all know what I mean.
Yeah.
So at the end of the Zoom shift, you just, like, go home and, like, fall asleep on the sofa. When you do it live, you go out, you have dinner for 3 hours, and it's fun, and there's joy and excitement, But I think I got this question before, like in terms of the ideas that we came up with, I don't think there was much of a like qualitative difference. So I think at the end of the day, the end result was pretty much the same. So if we discount my like happiness and enjoyment, I think the end result is the same, you know.
Yeah, and that's
Maybe
just-
someone has like an official answer to that. Like,
you'd like to step in or-
terms of like, pilot projects, how many came out of live open studios and how many came out of?
Sorry, maybe you have to repeat
Sorry,
it.
I have to. Yeah.
No, I'm trying to count them in my head.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there is much of a difference because the two that we were coordinating were from online open
Yeah.
studios. I think. No, it seemed like one was online, one was in person. So yeah.
Yeah, so they came from both the in-person and offline. Online. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so it has both its benefits and its downsides, as all different formats have, I guess, also. Okay, so should we move over to Nazli then? And Nazli, I think this is particularly interesting since we've been focusing a lot now on kind of activism and how to combine kind of research and activism. And I know that you have been working a lot in a lot of projects with members of civil society organizations, many who work under a lot of constraints. I mean, just as fighting the lack of awareness, political priority, resources, maybe don't have the time to spend on 2 days on things like that. So what do you see as the advantages and challenges in using the open studio format when working together with this group? What do you think civil society organization can get out of participating in open studios?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
Mm.
And I can count many, but I just pick some of the points that I will share with you now. And I think the most importantly, civil society organizations and activists have brought a community-powered, community-based approach to the open studios, because among the other participants, they are the ones who are directly working with the communities, with the groups who are made vulnerable. So they know these people, they know their real needs, and they know the stories. And on the other hand, like researchers, experts, or policymakers miss the opportunity to get close to these communities. So I think during the open studio, civil society, I mean, representatives from the civil society organizations and activists have filled this gap. And thanks to them, thanks to their contributions based on the observations coming from the field, I mean, we could develop action ideas which are really need-driven and solution-based and more acute at the same time. And thanks to the monitoring phase of the pilot projects, actually, we could have a chance to see this really concrete evidence. So in a very short time, we could be able to manage the budget and resources effectively. So then, I mean, we somehow achieved these great pilot projects at the end. And as a challenge, I would like to share one that I find it very challenging as an activist and also as a co-facilitator. I mean, the open studio methodology is pushing us to think more about the solutions than problems. By referring to Elena, it's like approaching problems as a solutions, right? But once you work at the civil society organization, and if you are an activist, you turn into like a detector of the right violations, injustices, inequalities, and all the missing points. And of course, you are becoming more inclined to talk about the problems than the solutions. But when you have such a format, when there's a limited time and we need to stick to the idea of co-creation and being solution-based, this part was challenging, but also thanks to the, using the better story concept in general, using personas and the way of facilitating worked very well during the open studio. So some way or another, we could be able to think for the better stories and develop these action ideas at the end. But as a facilitator and activist, this was the really most challenging part for me. And for the second part of the question, like what civil society organizations and activists get out of participating in Open Studio, I think as we already watched in the video, the Open Studio creates a platform where diverse perspectives and ideas can come together from different countries as well, not only one country. And this is also providing a unique opportunity for civil society organizations and activists to learn from each other and to hear other stories and the challenges at the same time. And I think this has created a sense of solidarity. So, for instance, personally, in most of the Open Studio, I heard many similar challenges from my fellow activist friends and other civil society representatives, which I think that they are only in Turkey. This can be sounded very weird and obvious, but when you are working in the field, when you are advocating for change, when you are facing the injustices on a daily basis, there is always a risk of losing a sight of a broader picture. So I think that's why during the Open Studio, most of the civil society representatives and activists have shared that listening to others have empowered them in a way that reminding we are not alone. So, it's just through listening to the experiences of others that we could be able to find strength and solidarity. And I think this was one of the common sharing at the feedback sessions of this Open Studio.
Yeah, they both kind of enjoyed the experience, the exchange between different civil society organizations, and also, just being energized by that in different ways. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So did you have a favorite open studio session? Anybody wants to say something about that?
Yeah, so for me personally, I think the second session, so the one that's focused on better stories, I think it was very interesting because it elicits a lot of variation in the responses.
Maybe you can explain a bit what it was about.
So we collected these better stories, like we said, and we presented them to the participants, and they could then try to answer questions about what could have been improved about this initiative or this policy, what could have been done differently, and how could a better, what's a theoretical policy context or societal context that could have made things better for this particular story. And so I think it was very interesting how people reacted to that, because it could be very enthusiastic, very inspired, and talking about implementing the kinds of practices that they saw in the better stories in their own work. Or it could be quite critical of the better stories. Pointing out blind spots that persisted in those better stories and how we could mitigate them or even get rid of them altogether, especially with regards to intersectionality and gender plus inequalities. So I think for that reason, it's a very interesting session, but also because it kind of gives the first, it kind of facilitates the first switch from issues-based thinking, where you're just focused on the problems and describing the problems, to a mindset that's more solutions-oriented. So meaning for example, with the question of what could have been a better societal context or policy context, that's already thinking about what actual things could have been done better and what can we actually design further on in this process. So I think it's also very important for that reason.
It also goes back to what Nazli was saying, that maybe they're not so, a lot of the participants, especially from civil society, hasn't been used in this way of working. And this was actually something that many brought up that were a positive thing that they wanted to bring home with them and try to do themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's also translated into the second day's 2 sessions where they really could design their own their own interventions.
Okay, so just a final round here, but I wanted to ask each and one of you, what do you see as the added value of doing the Open Studio for RESISTIRÉ that would not have been possible if we have had a more traditional approach? And what advice would you give to somebody who wants to do an Open Studio, the do's and don'ts? So you can choose any of these or answer both. So who wants to start? Alicia.
I can start. Yeah, I think I've already spoke about the added value that basically in traditional research, we don't move much more beyond the policy recommendations. That's where we stop. While there was the pilot projects that came out were really brilliant. And I guess that for me, being involved in the whole process as well, designing then the call and kind of monitoring was really, really valuable. And I really enjoyed it. And in terms of advice, and I think like coming back to what you asked in the beginning, how can we use this methodology beyond the project as well? I think if money was not an object and, you know, if there was all the funding on the planet, I would actually like to see that being translated to more local context as well. So we had all those European experts, which was amazing because you could hear perspectives from different countries. But I think it would be equally interesting to see people who work on the ground coming together and then implementing some kind of actions within that community that is affected by specific inequalities. So that kind of small research solution ecosystems, if that was possible. So I think
it's possible to be inspired really by the method and applying it maybe a little bit differently.
Translated to a different context as well. So keep going as it is, but also there is possibilities for maybe more micro scale. So that would be my advice to anybody who wants to take it on, like, you know, you should. So it doesn't matter if it's the EU or is it smaller context, it's still, I think, really applicable to even kind of micro scale case studies.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Lina, do you want to say something?
I think that's really good advice, Alicia. It doesn't have to be like my comment earlier about traveling across Europe. It doesn't have to be on that scale. It can be something you do on a local scale, and it doesn't have to involve. You can have the best of both worlds, something local in person without involving travel. So that makes a lot of sense. Apart from that, I guess my advice would be just to do it because it works. I think I'm one of those glass half empty kind of persons that look for problems and not solutions. And I was really like, my mind was blown by the end of the second day. Nearly like every Open Studio, really, like you can't imagine like at the start of the first day what's going to come out of the second day. So the method works. So I would say do it.
Yeah, that was truly amazing. I think we all felt that at the end of the second day, the very important work that had been done, and most people were saying that, did we do this? And all these ideas came up. Yeah. Yes, Nazli.
So as an advice, maybe I can just share my experience because it was the first time that I heard about the Open Studio, and I was very anxious and nervous about all of it because the methodology was new and I was supposed to co-facilitate, and I know that there's a structure and I could see that it is working, but most of the part is depending on the discussions at the small groups and the plenary. And of course, you need to facilitate, but facilitation in a more like a holding an inclusive space so that everybody is encouraged to share their ideas and like perspective, but also challenge some of the other ideas. And this was the tricky part because, there's a risk of destroy the logic of the open studio if you can directly try to moderate the space, but you need to facilitate and you need to keep the good balance while you are doing it. I think this is the tricky part, but also as an added value, like I think the open studio methodology is also deconstructing the idea of expertise. So it is not like bringing different experts for 2 days, but there is a paradigm shift. It is just creating a space for collective wisdom to emerge. I think this was not, can be attained by the traditional approaches as well.
Thank you. Yeah, we're actually run out of time, unfortunately, but very short, Aart.
No, I don't think I can add a lot to what's already been said. Just that, yeah, I think it's a crucial part of our process, and yeah, it really makes us come to terms with what we've actually researched and how we can, you know, convert that into something positive.
Thank you. And if you want to, you can always talk to us during dinner, and there are plenty other people here. If you raise your hand, those who have been participating in open studios, who can share their experiences. So a warm applause to our panelists.
Thank you so much. And indeed, I think quite a few of the Open Studio participants would be eager to share their reactions and findings. So do get back to them. So the last better story for the day that you're going to hear about goes back to January of this year, when over a consortium dinner in Strasbourg, we were discussing about how we could make all these marginalized voices collected by the narratives better heard. I mean, which we do, we're thinking about about different ways of doing it. Blog posts, yeah, not enough. We're thinking about podcasts, yeah, why not? How about a book? Now, most people sane in their mind would have replied, yeah, great idea. Shame we don't have enough time to do this. Not in Resistiré. The next morning, when we met for the consortium at 8 or 9 a.m., we had our scientific coordinator who already had drafted a publication plan, found a publisher, and found herself facing a whole room grinning, hyper motivated to see this project come through. So I'd like now to call Claudia and Aglietti and Elena Ghidoni, they're here, for a presentation of our brand new book of narratives, Better Stories from the Pandemic. Claudia Aglietti is a researcher and project coordinator and KNI in Italy, and Elena Ghidoni is a postdoctoral researcher at the Human Rights Institute of the University of Deusto. Up to you. You want to sit down there? Yeah, I knew that.
I think it works. Yeah, okay. So thank you, Colette. We are very thrilled to present this book, actually, that was recently published, and it is a result of the project. As you see on the screen also, it is called Better Stories from the Pandemic. It is a book of 80 stories, 80 interviews with people who share their experiences during the pandemic. And these experiences speak about gender and intersecting inequalities. So as you have heard from previous presentations during Resistiré, we have collected almost 800 interviews during these last 2 years. And at that point, at the dinner that Colette mentioned, we wondered how could we give all these voices dissemination and allow them also to inspire others beyond the project. And that's when the idea of the book came up. And then we started discussing the content of the book, and we asked ourselves what we wanted these stories to tell about the pandemic. And We imagined a book that would possibly go beyond the traumatic experiences of that time and would also give space to the example of individual and collective solidarity, of resistance, of self-reflection and change. And eventually the book is a mix of the two. It's a mix of challenges and also of inspiring stories. So Claudia and I, together with other amazing colleagues, Alexis, Audrey, Katrina, Pinar, and Nazli, we were part of the editorial committee that worked on the selection of the stories. So these 800 stories. So we first asked the network of researchers across Europe to select those interviews that they believed were the most significant in each country, the ones that really showed how inequalities played out during the pandemic and how individuals coped with them. When we received this first selection of interviews, we then carefully analyzed them. It was a really hard process. And because we wanted to make sure that no voice was left behind. You will find more details about that in the book. And we wanted to make sure that the book reflected the diverse faces of inequalities during the pandemic. So after this process, we ended up with these 80 beautiful, very intense stories of 80 persons across 29 countries. And the stories show individual and collective struggles, but through these struggles, we also see the broader reality of gender and its intersections. I'll just let you. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Through these pages, you will find the experiences of persons who were already exposed to systematic inequalities, even before the pandemic shocked the world. In their own voices, the protagonists open up and tell how life all of a sudden became extremely difficult for them, with many difficulties and challenges. When the pandemic hit, it was said that we were all together in this. And it was true, because every one of us experienced suffering, had to struggle to cope, to understand, to take care of their own well-being and the well-being of the beloved ones, for example. But then there were other people who were suffering even more because of their position in society. This is why with this book, it will feel like stepping into the lives of 80 different people and see from within how difficulties became, as I said, really extreme and unbearable. You will find the stories of working women struggling among tasks, or stories of frontline healthcare workers with the risk they took, the burden they had. Moreover, there will be testimonies of young people, transgender, for example, who were forced to spend the lockdown in the same house with hostile parents, as well as stories of people with disability, elderly exposed to isolation, or undocumented migrants. In terms of structure, we decided not to cluster the narratives into themes, into countries or topics. We only wanted to provide the book with a kind of movement, which is a wave. So the reader will pass from one challenging story to one which opens more to hope, to the positive. Because we must admit that this book is about pain. There are stories that you read, they end, and you ask yourself, and then what happened to this person? But then there are other stories, better stories, which are more open to hope, which present, as the keynote speaker earlier said, better tomorrows.
Yeah, indeed, hope and pain are weaved together in the concept of better story that you've already heard today many times and has been one of our main inspirations during Resistiré and also in the design of the book. So the concept of better story was developed by Lina, as it was already mentioned, and the core message of the better story is an invitation to deep listening to stories and to acknowledge pain as well as resilience, as painful stories also have a transformative potential. So rather than looking at perfect outcomes and perfect stories, the better story invites us to look at those sparks that emerge in the most challenging circumstances and that allow us to imagine the possibility of alternative futures. So to give you an example of how the better story works in our narratives, we will share one of these stories.
Yes, because indeed it seems that COVID-19 also represented a window of opportunity for some to reflect on their life, to find the courage also to take decisions and improve their situation. So we choose one story, which is the story of Vera from Croatia. At the time of narrative collection, she was 72 years old. She's affected by paraplegia and she's forced to live on a wheelchair. In 2020, she was living in a house for retirement, but she was very, very active and used to organize workshops also for the fellow residents there. She even founded a civil society organization from there to set up a beekeeping activity in front of the building. Then in March, COVID-19 arrived, and as she says, her life turned into a horror story. The residents were forced to live in their small rooms, locked in. They couldn't communicate to each other because of the fear of the contagion. And the staff of the place even scolded them if some were found like talking from the balconies. In this moment, Vera realizes that she cannot accept that, she desires something different. And based on the few resources she had, she decided to move. When the restrictions were lifted, she moved to the coast. She rented a house by herself, and she resumed the activity with the bees from there. She put so much passion on that today the activity features on the tourist guides for the area. And yes, this was an example of better story we wanted to share, how to transform pain and loneliness into the will, the desire, and the courage to take a new path.
Yes, and to conclude, we hope you will enjoy the book and the journey through the lives of these 80 people who generously share their experiences with us. And we also want to thank the national researchers because this book would not exist without their fieldwork and their interviews. And we hope that you will be inspired as we were by the stories of solidarity, of love, friendship, resilience, community, and strength. I think the book is open access, is available on our webpage. And we have printed a limited number of copies, and I think you will be given one in a while. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to see who has been working on this? I'd like to invite all the editors and the editorial committee to come up on stage. We would come up on stage, come along. And let's give them a round of applause for all this hard work done. And the editorial, there we go. All these hardworking people who didn't stop.
So this was really an amazing effort, and we are thrilled with the results. I mean, obviously, this wasn't one of the planned deliverables, but it's, I think, one of the most exciting ones that will help RESISTIRÉ research more people in more accessible forms. And really, we've been so much inspired by all these stories. And I think the creation of the book itself has been a story of resilience and solidarity, feminist solidarity. So please, big applause for the amazing editors. And there's been an editorial committee behind. Sophia, I mean, made this happen. Certainly, Harula was there. And it wouldn't have been possible without Colette either. So Aslı Alpar, whose illustrations you see in the book. So the book design was done by an ecofeminist designer, Özge Özgüner. We're grateful to her work, which was late into the night on the last night before the printing actually happened. And the illustrations come from Aslı Alpar, and she has let us print the illustrations for everyone involved in the book. So this is the present from Aslı Alpar.
Marina, up you come too. And so, as you heard, these are limited editions. We have I think we have only 100 copies, and we have brought 70 with us today. So not that you need to start running, but we have the pleasure and honor of giving you, each one of you, a copy of this book as you leave. So as you exit the building, either now or after dinner, you'll be able to pick up a copy at the registration desk.
Thank you.
So thanks to all of you for your involvement, and thank you for attending this first day, quite intense and hot. So we now invite you, all of you, to go to the next door room, where we'll be able to have refreshments and and pursue the discussions together. Okay, so tomorrow morning we reconvene at 9 a.m. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.